He bounced straight up into the air, using his hands and legs to propel him. Empowered by his suit, he rose close to 15 feet in an instant, at the same time that the screamer, having shifted its head in his direction, unleashed a blast of sound. The majority of the sound was absorbed by the earth, but Mark was still caught by the edge of the cone. His body tumbled through the air and landed with a hard thud. Knowing he didn't have time to wait, Mark threw himself at the screamer, hoping to catch it before its scream reset. As dangerous as the fight was, Mark had spent hours upon hours in the dream world every night, desperately looking for ways to defeat screamers. Though he had managed to wound them a few times, Mark had never survived the encounters. Now, however, he didn't have a choice. Unlike in his dreams, there was no reset in the real world. No coming back to life once you were killed. You won, or it was game over. As he dashed toward the screamer, Mark drew his sword, activating the mana edge. He was 3 steps away when he realized he wouldn't make it in time. And as the screamer's mouth opened, Mark abruptly changed direction, moving to the left. He knew the screamer would be able to track him. It could shift the trajectory of its attack with unbelievable speed. So he hurled his sword straight toward its open mouth. Busy adjusting its aim to accommodate his abrupt change of direction, the screamer didn't have a chance to avoid the blade. And with a sharp thwack, the tip of the mana sword sank deep into the side of the screamer's cheek and into its mouth, piercing through its flesh and releasing a spray of blood. The screamer's head jerked to the side, and its sound blast mixed with a cry of pain. The mana sword, which had been stuck in its mouth, melted under the fierce vibration that erupted from the screamer's throat, and Mark's heart clenched. 23. As the creature thrashed in pain, shaking its head back and forth to try to dislodge the half-melted blade stuck in its cheek, Mark lunged close. As distracted as it was, the screamer still lashed out with one of its 6 limbs, attempting to rend Mark in half. Knowing that he didn't have the strength to contend directly, Mark shifted to the side, using his palm to deflect the limb, and then launched attacks of his own, his hands flying in a flurry of blows that targeted its joints. Within moments, the limb was a bloody mess, and the screamer jerked back. It was large, nearly 10 feet in length, and had a bulbous body. Though stronger than Mark, it wasn't built for close combat, so it tried to distance itself, pulling back to get its sound blast lined up. Desperate not to let it, Mark stayed close, sticking to its side and attacking as fiercely as he could. Unfortunately, while his attacks were strong and pierced through the monster's skin easily, he couldn't deal enough damage to keep it from pulling away. With a powerful leap, the monster launched itself into the air, escaping from Mark's range and landing on the wall of the cavern. One of its legs hung loose, useless after Mark's barrage of attacks, but it still managed to grip the wall as it glared murderously at Mark. Though the mana sword hadn't been dislodged, its sound blast was ready to deploy, and as it aimed its opening mouth toward Mark, he retreated as fast as he could. His only hope was that the cavern was large enough that the sound would dissipate before it reached him. Unfortunately, he strongly suspected that that wouldn't be the case. His other option, of course, was to try to hide under the water, but in reality, that would simply hasten his demise, as the pool wouldn't stop the vibration from the attack. Not wanting to be boiled alive, Mark retreated to the other side of the cavern, racking his mind for options. Though the screamer was only a C-ranked Exilian warrior, Mark honestly would rather have faced a B-ranked brain. At least then his null field ability would work, protecting him from the blasts. As it was, the null field didn't do anything against the screamer's roars. When the sound came, it filled the cavern, shaking Mark's bones and rupturing both of his eardrums. Intense pain filled him, and he nearly collapsed to the ground, barely managing to keep himself on his feet with a hand against the wall. The sound grew dull, though he could still feel it reverberating through his body. With a groan, he staggered to the side, losing his grip on the wall and stumbling to the ground. The screamer, taking advantage of his weakness, rushed closer, its throat working as it began to recharge its sound blast. Mark's body was already healing, his regeneration sucking up his biofuel to knit his wounds back together, but he knew full well he wouldn't recover in time. Skittering across the wall, the screamer arrived above Mark, its mouth opening wide as it stared down at him. Mark felt as if he should be afraid of his impending death, as if it should have somehow bothered him. Instead, he felt a fierce surge in his heart, and struggling to his feet, he glared up at the screamer defiantly. As if mocking him, the monster opened its mouth all the wider, its chest vibrating as the blast of sound began to emerge. Yet, just before the ability truly activated, there was a flash of silver, and 3 of the monster's 5 remaining legs were cut free from its body, causing it to lose its grip on the wall. Hanging face down above Mark, it suddenly plunged toward the ground, slamming head first into the dirt. The sound blast drove straight into the ground, superheating the soil and causing it to melt into a fiery slurry that burned the screamer's mouth and head. Dumbfounded by the sudden development, Mark stared up at the wall, where he saw Mime perched like a gecko, one paw extended. A gleaming silver claw slowly retracted into the paw as she gave him a decidedly sentient grin. The screamer was flailing on the ground in front of Mark, its head and shoulders badly burned by the intense heat of its blast. The shock of the sudden reversal was immense, but Mark wasn't going to let this opportunity slip away. With a shout of his own, he lunged forward, driving his hand into the base of the screamer's neck. It pierced through, his fingers meeting the monster's spine. As its large body began to flail underneath him, he brought down his other hand, chopping deep into the bone. It took 2 more strikes before the screamer's spine was severed. As soon as he felt the bones parting, Mark jumped to safety. Though dead, the screamer's body continued to spasm, jerking this way and that. Mark stayed well clear of its flailing claws until finally, with one last mighty shudder, it fell still. Still perched on the wall, Mime looked down at the corpse, licking her lips. Mark collapsed to the ground, flat on his back as he tried to catch his breath. With shaking hands, he reached up and unclipped his helmet, letting it roll to the side as he stared up at the dark ceiling. Mark heard the soft patter of paws, and then Mime climbed onto his chest and stared down at him. "Thanks." Mark's voice was rough. Even though his regeneration had healed all the wounds he had suffered during the fight, he could feel a gaping emptiness in his chest, the result of his total mental and emotional exhaustion, to say nothing of his nearly empty biofuel. Mime nudged his chin with her nose, and then pointed toward the body of the screamer, as if urging him to hurry up. With a groan, Mark pushed himself into a seated position and reached out, touching one of the screamer's fallen limbs. Mime had slid down to his lap when he sat up, and now she turned to stare at the corpse, her eyes burning crimson. Mark's shadow shifted, rising up in a wave to engulf the massive corpse. For a long time, the cavern was filled with a faint crunching sound. The screamer's flesh was filled with energy, and Mark's exhaustion quickly dissipated. By the time he had gotten through 1/4 of the body, his biofuel was already full. As he continued to consume it, Mark felt the energy filling him. It seemed to carry a faint vibration, stimulating Mark's flesh and bones. Uncomfortable at first, the vibration produced a heat that sank into every corner of Mark's body, making him feel like he had just received a massage. By the time he had finished devouring the corpse, Mark knew with certainty that something had changed. Glancing down at his wrist, he saw multiple notifications blinking up at him. Name: Mark Fields. City status: citizen. Rank: C. Core power: absorption: B. Strength: D+. Fortitude: C. Speed: C+. Will: C+. Genetic adaptations: material characteristic absorption. Alchemical blood. Regeneration. Quantum clones. Genetic memory: 2 of 3. Bone blade. Null field. Empty. Biofuel: 30 of 30. Mark's absorption of the C-ranked screamer had been enough to push him over the edge, causing his stats to jump. The only one that hadn't shifted was his strength, likely because of the attributes that the Screamer prioritized. It made him wonder what would happen if he devoured a Hulk or another Exlian who focused on strength. Though the rank up only took him from D+ to C, Mark could feel the powerful difference having a C-ranked fortitude made. His body was clearly tougher and would be able to withstand damage easier. But more than that, Mark realized as he stood up that fortitude affected his own movements as well. His speed had grown to the C rank first, yet he hadn't truly been able to take advantage of that, as his body simply couldn't keep up. Moving too quickly would have caused him to damage himself, so his body had naturally capped how much of his speed it unleashed. The same was likely true for strength, though Mark's strength seemed to be lagging behind his other stats. Now that his fortitude was C-ranked, Mark could use his increased speed to its full effect. Sufficient specialized genetic material acquired. Would you like to remember Sound Blast? Realizing he now had an extra slot for genetic memory because of his upgrade to C rank, Mark opened up that ability. Genetic Memory, 2 of 3. Slot 1, Bone Blade. Slot 2, Null Field. Slot 3, Empty. For a few minutes he debated taking the Screamer's Sound Blast ability, but remembering how the Null Field had done something to his body, Mark ultimately decided it just wasn't worth it. He imagined that to use the Sound Blast ability, he would have to modify his throat and mouth, and he could only imagine what he might end up looking like. Besides, there would likely be other, better abilities in the future, and he still didn't know if he could discard an ability he had claimed, or if they were permanent. Though the experience of fighting the Screamer had been harrowing, and Mark had only survived thanks to Mime's sneak attack, Mark was in high spirits as he climbed out of the pit and wound his way through the cave to leave the tunnel system. As he advanced, he continually scanned the psychic network, looking for threats, and was pleased to see that his range had grown slightly. It appeared that as he ranked up, it would continue to expand, allowing him to sense others at a greater distance. There were no enemies nearby, so Mark headed for the mine. Physically, he was in peak shape, his body completely recovered from the damage he had suffered and filled to bursting with energy. Mentally, however, he was exhausted and badly in need of rest. When he arrived at the mine, everything was quiet. So after locking the door, he crawled into bed and quickly fell into a deep sleep. Though he still found himself in the dream world, all his mental exhaustion had been wiped away, and Mark spent the time getting used to his new stats. The major improvement in both his speed and his fortitude, as well as the minor improvement in his strength, made it even easier to eliminate the D-ranked Exlian warriors, and Mark had a rather relaxed training session. He focused on keeping at least one of his enemies alive as long as possible, practicing controlling the fight as he explored the limits of his new physical abilities. The next morning, he arose bright-eyed, and after stretching and moving through a light workout, he wandered outside. The sun had yet to fully peak over the horizon, and the sky was cast in blues and pinks. Climbing up the mountain a little ways, Mark sat on a rock overlooking the base and spent a few moments just appreciating the view. During his contemplation, Mime appeared and joined him. She seemed quite curious as to what he was doing, and for some reason, Mark felt the need to explain it to her. "Isn't that beautiful?" he said, gesturing to the bright colors on the horizon.